Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we uncover the leadership life hacks that help you to experience breakout performance faster and rocket to success. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rimbach.
Call Center Coach develops and unites the next generation of call center leaders. Through our e-learning and community, individuals gain knowledge and skills in the 6 core competencies that is the blueprint that develops high-performing call center leaders. Successful supervisors do not just happen. So go to callcentercoach.com to learn more about enrollment and download your copy of the Supervisor Success Path ebook now. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today I'm excited because we have somebody on the show today who will give you a little bit of a different perspective on finding engagement and happiness at work. Aaron McHugh grew up in Southern California in the mountains of the Sierra Nevada. His dad was a pastor in a small church, and his grandfather worked at Disneyland. Aaron's the oldest of 3, and early in his childhood, he could be found playing in a creek or chasing lightning bugs in the woods. Early in his career, he was selling 60-second radio commercials to liquor stores and bars, but became elated with how ideas can change the world. Later in his career in software and technology, traveling the globe, he found himself in boardrooms with executives not living their fullest and their best life. After personal burnout in 2015, he found himself on the sidelines of life personally and professionally, with one child in drug recovery program and another who had passed away. He and his wife and youngest daughter retreated to the mountains to volunteer at a Young Life camp for high school kids. During that time of pause and reflection, they began to imagine what a life would look like if they had the opportunity to get out of bed with passion and fulfillment every single day. Today, after their big reboot of selling everything they owned and starting over, now Aaron's doing work he loves, working with executives, leading transformational reboots in the workplace. Aaron McHugh is a writer, podcaster, adventurer, and author of the best-selling book, Fire Your Boss, Discover Work You Love Without Quitting Your Job. He's mastering an art of living a sustainable work-life balance that constantly interweaves rhythms of play and adventure. That includes road trips in their 74 VW bus, aka the Joy Bus, catapulting them into many father-daughter adventures together. Aaron works as an affiliate advisor to Abercon, a division of McKinsey & Company, and facilitator of transformation and executive coaching. He and his wife, Leaf, live in Colorado Springs, Colorado. They are celebrating 25 years of marriage in December. Their marriage has survived the death of their 12-year-old daughter, Hadley, in 2011. Their 21-year-old son, Holden, lives in Costa Mesa and is thriving and recovering 3 years clean and sober. Their youngest daughter lives at home. Aaron McHugh, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
Yeah, man, that is quite the intro. I hope I can live up to it.
Well, I know you will. I've really enjoyed the book, and I'm looking forward to our conversation because it is a little bit of a twist in thinking and mindset. But before we get into that, I've given my Legion a little bit about you, but can you share what your current passion is so we can get to know you even better?
Yeah, I'm working on a life project of climbing. I live in Colorado. We have 58 14,000-foot peaks, and I'm down to 17 left. So I started in my 20s. I'm knocking on the door of 50, and I've got a project to knock out a good handful of them this summer. So that's been really fun, like just a kind of a figurative, like a conquest of climbing mountains, and literal as well.
So as you're saying that, I have to think, is it you alone, or is it you and others? Is it you and your daughter? Is it you and your wife? Is it family?
Great question. A lot of buddies. My family, direct family, they don't love climbing mountains. They think it's just too hard. They really look at them. So I have some buddies that I do it with, and a number of them, it's kind of like a trophy, I guess, of a conquest. They're called the 14ers. There's the 58. So I have a couple buddies who have completed them. So I'm on my last, punch list of being able to knock all these out.
Well, it's interesting you say that, and I can definitely see some parallels drawn with the stories that you share and the pathway and the journey that you have in the book. It's a conquest,
Very much.
And so when I start looking at the book, in the beginning, you talk about, meaning a conquest, that you've written this book 3 times. What do you mean?
Yeah, I was talking to my editor and I was trying to write the intro to the book had been written, but now we went to the very beginning to say, okay, now it's time to write the introduction. And I told him on the phone, I said, actually what I really want to say is, and I just rattled it off. I'm like, I've written this book 3 times. I've almost quit. I'm tired of it. So where that came from was about, I don't even know, 15 years ago, roughly 12 years ago, I sat on my back patio and I started writing what I knew to be longer than a blog post, but shorter than a book at the time. And I basically wrote this kind of like manifesto, this fire your boss core idea. And so I sat down and penned it. Well, then a number of years later, I just turned that into like a little ebook. A number of years later, I'm like, I should really put that like in a published, self-published version in a, what would you call it, leaflet-like size. So I self-published it. Second time I'd written it. And then what had happened is once I actually signed a contract with a publisher, then I'm embarking on the third time to write it. And actually it was really overwhelming. When I sat down to write it, it was like, oh my gosh, how many times am I going to tread over this same story, which resulted in me writing a brand new book that I hadn't written before.
Well, and then talking about that journey and that pathway, it lends me to believe, and when I, of course, without getting into the book, look at the cover and crack the binding open, you start asking yourself the question, can I really, fire my boss without quitting my job? How can you do that?
Yeah. In the beginning, what happened, Jim, was I actually was on a bike ride with a friend. I was much younger and less wise. And I really thought that the way forward was to arrange the circumstances of my life. And so in particular, I had this one boss that I found really challenging to work with, but I needed to keep the job. My family was in full tilt. Our suburban life cost a lot of money. And we had, as you mentioned in the intro, I had a kid that had passed away and one in drug rehab. And so what we looked at was, man, I don't see any other way around this other than I'm going to fire my boss. I just blurted it out on the bike ride to my buddy and he giggled. And I was like, no, I'm serious. I don't know how to, but I'm going to find a way to reduce the impact this person is having on me. And so it really began forcing me to then ask some inward questions versus circumstantial questions about the environment or that person's decisions, whatever it may be.
Well, and part of that leads into something I think all of us might even suffer from. You talk about it in the book, is that we have a very difficult time of articulating what's inside. Can you provide some insight into that?
Yeah, what I find is that for so many of us in life, in work, we're just, I won't call it autopilot, but we're just doing life. You wake up, you do a Monday, you wake up and you do a Friday, you wake up, you do a Saturday, and then we just rinse and repeat. And very infrequently do we have the opportunity we use a phrase in the consulting work I do about taking a balcony perspective, like getting up on the balcony, looking down and actually, getting an aerial view of what's happening, what's going on there. And so what we found is that I realized like part of what my superpower is being able to narrate a story. Like as a narrator opens a film and says, here's what's happening. I'm not a great character writer. I can't do any of that, but I do a really good job of like narrating what's happening in a scene or in a picture or in an environment. And so I found myself like, oh, okay, I'm going to try and narrate my own experience. And maybe this will help other people. And what I found is that so often you have all this churn or mystery, but it's really hard to get to the bottom of name. And I think there's 2 things that compound that. One is very little margin in our life. We're just always in a go mode. And then secondly is, I think, leading with questions versus demanding answers. And when we lead with questions, with curiosity, then it opens up the possibility of, well, maybe I don't know, or maybe this isn't just a linear equation to be solved. Maybe this is a bigger question to live into.
Well, as you say that, I start thinking about somebody who talked about some of that issue of being able to articulate it, is that oftentimes we're asking the wrong question. And one of the things that he points out is that we should not be asking why. Instead, we should be asking what. What do I need to do versus why have I done this? And, those kind of things. Do you find that similar type of structure that seems to work?
Yeah, that's a great frame. One of the frames that I use a lot is I find oftentimes we ask destination-based questions, meaning like, here I am, point, X on the map right now where I stand today, but Y is where I want to go, this other place. And it's very much, that's finances, that's health, that's marriage, that's relationships, that's career. And I think instead that's super unhelpful very often, because the gap between where I am today and where I want to be, a better question would be, what would it look like for me to become the kind of person who could thrive at that Y position on the map? And oftentimes I find like that 5-year plan question, where are you going to be 5 years from now? What are you going to do? I've always been horrible at that question, because I've always found by the time 5 years later, my life has changed so massively. I'm different. My circumstances are different. The world's different. So instead, what I've learned is how can I become an adaptive person where I can thrive in any and all situations? And that to me is a fundamentally different question, which is that kind of reframing is, what can I do differently today?
Well, and for me, what I jokingly say, when somebody's asked how you doing or what you're working on, I'm learning how to master becoming a pivot artist.
Nice. I like that. That's great. Yeah, I often will say I'm learning to master the art of living, which is an art. It's not a science.
Most definitely. Yeah. Okay, so and I think this is kind of where you get into in the book, where you start talking about the difference between conventional wisdom and revolutionary heretical wisdom. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it makes me smile, even just the word heretical. What I learned is early on in my life, I was always the person, the kid, who asked, why do we do it that way? Or how come it's this way? Or, well, who says? I was always a challenger in that way. And definitely with not a lot of maturity early on in how I asked those questions. But what I realized is that I was onto something, is that in conventional wisdom of our culture today advertises as it relates to our career. Get a good job, make as much money as you can, hold on to it for dear life, take 2-week vacations, and that should be enough. It doesn't matter if you love what you do, you have responsibilities, on and on. So that's just this. Now, we may not be able to actually see them anywhere, as a plaque in the office space, but they're just these conventional wisdom things in the environment. And what I found was that when you research heretics, and heretics are revolutionaries, people who caused revolutions, well, I actually just started making a table of them. And I'm like, you know what? Joan of Arc. I remember, yeah, right. What did she do? Oh, well, she's 16 years old and women stay at home and make babies and nurse kids, and she goes to war. I'm like, oh, look, well, Oprah, I watched this documentary on Oprah. Well, everyone told Oprah to change her name and that talk shows are ruled by men back in the day of Phil Donahue's. And so I'm like, oh, heretics create a reality in a world they want to live into. They move beyond conventional wisdom to architect a future and a place they want to go. And so I realized oh, well, if you look at statistically right now in our workplace, 2/3 of the American workforce, and it's even worse globally, are disengaged. That's horrible. 1/3 of the people listening to this actually enjoy what they do every day. So I looked at that and say, hold on, conventional wisdom says hang tight. Gallup poll says we're working on it. We'll get back to you when we find a better solution. In the meantime, 2/3 of people, and we actually have stats that now say how it affects us physiologically, our health also, not only our emotional, mental well-being, but physical well-being, our relationships, our communities we belong to. And so I'm like, BS. I can't stand for this. We got to find a way to architect a future that we want to be part of.
Well, and for me, I come from the customer service and customer experience and contact center world. And one of the things that's so important that talking about studies and the empirical evidence continues to prove out, but yet we still keep fighting it for some darn reason, is that all of these issues internally affect the customer.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
It is it's a transformative type of, and very relational, in that if I'm having these issues internally, that they're going to seep outside. So when you start talking about the work that you're doing with a lot of these organizations and going through this transformation, how much is the customer in their mind?
Oh, I love that question. The work I do is in the context of what they call agile transformations, and agile, this methodology rooted back in software. And what's really cool is it's super customer centric. It's the base premise is how do we delight our client, our customer? What does it look like for us to create and innovate with them in mind? And great companies that come to mind, like Spotify is one that was early on, real famous for that. In how they created their music software. And so there's lots of companies that are using agile ideas. So customers always at the core. And the other thing I think that's really important is that the work that I get a chance to do every day is it's this combination of doing and being. And so often in work, we're so focused on doing, accomplishing, back to our conquest word we used earlier. And what's missed, and what I loved about the intro that we worked on together this morning, was it's about being also. Who am I at an identity level, at a human level? And I remember my grandfather, he worked at Disneyland as a kid growing up. And he used to say like that people would like leave their brains in their trunks when they would come into Disneyland, the park. And I used to think that was really funny. And so I think I just grew up with like a framing of like, you can actually leave parts of you at home. Like you could leave your heart at home. You bring your brain to work, but leave your heart at home. Leave your mess at home, like lock it up. But make sure when you come to work, bring your brain, get some stuff done, and compartmentalize. And what we've learned now is that widely that both the human is the human wherever we are. And so it's learning to bring your whole self to work, and which is cool because it unlocks more and unleashes more potential that we can bring with creativity to the solutions that we're solving for at work.
Well, and even, I don't know if you followed the work of Susan Fowler. She's been on the Fast Leader Show a couple of times, and she has really closely followed and become a domain expert in the science of motivation. And so some of the things that you're talking about, that is absolutely true from a scientific perspective and what engages us. So now in the book, though, when you start talking about this whole boss thing, is that you say that we're stuck in a binary way of thinking. What does that mean?
Yeah, there's this great author that I love, Richard Rohr, and he talked about how binary thinking is if-then thinking. It's very like, so for instance, for me, when I was looking at some big career changes, when my wife and I, we moved to the mountains and kind of rebooted our life, it was like, well, if I quit my job, I'll probably be unemployable forever. If I, let's see, I don't think this way anymore, so it's harder for me to find good examples. There's some great ones in the book.
Well, in the book you talk specifically about, and what I'm referring to is you say, good boss versus lousy boss. And you're saying the binary thinking in that is damaging.
Yes, that's great. In that chapter, thanks, Jim, for that prompt. In that chapter, what I was talking about, and it's called The Lessons from the Lair, and this idea of the hero's journey of actually going down into where the dragons live. So often, as it relates to bosses, people put bosses in the category of good and bad, and I did forever. Until I went to go visit a mentor of mine, and I called him up and said, hey, could I fly down? It was a business mentor. He was just older, but I asked him, would you be willing to give me some advice? And he was probably 25 years ahead of me on the journey. So I flew down to see him, and he was telling me this story about earlier in his career, he had this bad boss. And he told me what he learned was that oftentimes hardship is the assignment. I was like, what? What are you talking about? He's like, I learned so much from working for this lousy person that now as a CEO in his story then, he's like, now I lead so differently. And so it really helped me reframe like, oh, you mean every boss I've ever had has a lesson to teach me? He goes, the good ones, but especially the bad ones. So it really helped me say, oh, so even in my current, life today, I work with lots of humans, ones that are, in side by side as colleagues, some that are up, vertically in terms of where they are in their seniority, and then others are, across the landscape in clients. And I just learned, oh, okay, everyone has an important lesson to teach me here. Now, with that comes my choice. And that was a big piece too, is to learn that I own my response. And that it's not they, if you ever hear the phrase, oh, they made me feel, or they made me, I'm like, oh, that's a bell ringer, like, oh yeah, red alert. That's not, oh, they made me. Oh, interesting. Okay. I used to think that way too. So learning to become what I talk about, learning to lead ourselves. So it's really taking back the agency and ownership, and especially of reframing those stories as it relates to bosses.
Well, and talking about that self component, you talk about your 4x5 self. What is your 4x5 self?
Yeah, actually, I have him sitting here right next to me. So when I got out of college, I had this big dream, like wide-eyed, the world's my oyster. And we moved to Colorado, and I worked for a camp. My wife and I, newly married, we lived in this little 10 by 10 log cabin that was built in the 1920s. And, it was really, I drove this cattle truck, and the cattle truck we used to drop high school kids off at trailheads to go backpacking. And I found this picture a number of years ago, and I'm hanging out at the side of the truck. And what was really cool was I looked at him, my younger 22-year-old self, and I started to have some dialogue with him of like, hey, can you remind me, what did we intend when we intended our career, like our life? What were we setting out to do here? Like, because in the beginning, before the road got steep and rocky and complicated and complex with 401ks and college savings and braces and all that kind of stuff and mortgage payments, like there was a through line of like passion and purpose and impact and people. And I just feel like I needed that 4x5 version of myself to befriend him again and to ask him to come back into my life. Like, can we do this together? Because I feel a little in over my head right now. And this is less so today, but we still have some dialogue. So we have made friends again. And I've reclaimed a lot of those original design of what we were intending to do.
And I think this probably links into what you had referenced as being the hardest chapter you wrote in the book. So tell us a little bit about which one it was and why it was so difficult.
Yeah, probably as I think about it, I'll be curious if it's the one that you're thinking of too. I wrote a chapter on blame. And as I wrote the chapter, I don't remember at the top of my head which number it is right now, but it basically is titled, What's Wrong with the World? And I didn't want to write it. I kept attempting to take it out of the outline of the book. And the bottom line is, I'm not very proud of this, but I find that I can quickly go to blaming others. And Brene Brown used this phrase, and I actually just found this like in a really small little 2-minute video that she used, which she said, the problem with blamers is that we rarely take accountability and responsibility for our own actions. And that blame is the projection of pain. It's the projection and assignment of pain on someone else. And when I read that, listened to her say that, I thought, oh gosh, man, talk about guilty. Like guilty. Yes, I raised my hand. That's me. So the reason it was hard for me to write was not only I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to be seen as a blamer. But I recognized in vulnerability, like that's the honest truth. That had really gotten me in a lot of pickles in my life and stuck places of my own doing. Secondly to that, I really wanted to believe that 99% of the people listening to us right now, watching this, don't struggle with it at all. So I was like, why drag the 1% of the people who are blamers, why drag them through it if it's an unnecessary chapter for them? And what's really funny is now I've found there's a lot more blamers than the 1% that I thought might be out there. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, that first of all was your lucky number 7 chapter. And I mean, for me, I found that I have some of that tendency, but then I also started looking at, quite frankly, a struggle that I have with my oldest son. where he wants to do exactly that. It's, everybody else's problem. And one of the things that you also talk about in that particular chapter that I think I see, him and maybe others see this too, is that is their way of actually maintaining control. So if I'm blaming everybody else for the things that aren't going right, it's not my issue, man, because I've got my stuff under control. Well, so the reality is that you spent 3 days doing something that should have lasted 30 minutes, and now you missed your assignment and you're late, right? It's like, why did you get a lower grade? I mean, it was all your fault, man.
Which is, you just proved in that little example, that's Brene Brown's quote, is that rarely do blamers take accountability and responsibility for their actions. And that was me. I was okay.
Well, and the reality is when you start talking about this, people call it VUCA world, right? Volatile, unpredictable, and all of that, is that, there's more unpredictability that's going to increase at an ever increasing rate. And so therefore, if I am a blamer, what are you really going to control? Nothing.
Right. And I love that question of control. Is that, to me, it became really helpful when I retired the blame card. Then it enabled for me to do two things. Is, for one, it enabled for me to look inward and look at what is possibly my contribution to this circumstance, this relationship, this story, this career upset, this personal relationship thing. Secondly, it also enabled me to, once I had greater ownership over my own actions, behaviors, and choices, then it was much easier to be clear about what other people's choices and actions are. And I can say, listen, there can be a line of delineation between me and them, or me and the circumstances, or me and this outcome. And so I became much more neutral and much less emotionally charged, and much less fixed on outcomes, and more back to those kind of small, like we call it in my hula hoop. Like if you stand inside a hula hoop, like this is mine and this is what I can control. And there's all kinds of stuff outside of my hula hoop I don't have a lot of control over, and I can influence it though. So being clear about what's the difference between control and influence.
Well, and so I think part of that is also you did an experiment, and you shared your experiment, and you talked about 8 magnificent people. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'd come back from a training in Europe, and a number of the people that I was there with, colleagues, they all had these individual coaching practices. And they were talking about how much they learned from these coaches coaching clients. And so I'm like, oh, that's easy. I think I'm going to fire up and experiment. I'm going to try something. So I sent out this email. I wrote it in the morning, and I just had these like 3 or 4 questions. Like, do you think there's something really important that you're here to do with your life? You don't know what it is, or you know what it is and you get stuck. You really aren't sure what to do next and how to take the next step. And you'd like help and a guide. And like, it was just super simple like that. Wrote it, sent it to, 1,500 people or something. And I couldn't believe it was like by far still the most responded to email I've ever sent. And I had all these people coming in. So I said, I'm looking for 8 people, and I'm going to run an experiment. It's going to be 6 weeks long, and we're going to have some conversations about these kinds of topics. So I ended up, through application process, selecting these magnificent 8. And we embarked on this journey of, I said it wasn't counseling or therapy, but at moments we got deep. But it was asking big questions like, well, how do you know what it is you're here to do? And we go back to that 4x5, the picture of myself, like in the beginning. What did you believe? Because what I find is like part of the tragedy for me, and this is like just a human condition, I can't stand the idea, like at a soulful heart level, that 70% of people go to work every day in some degree of despair or apathy. And so to me, it's like, I'm going to take a swing at engaging more people. Well, let's start with what do you love? What do you care about? What do you think the difference is here to make? If we put aside like the cultural conventional wisdom, like buy as much stuff as you can, buy as big a house, like binge watch every TV show, like hold on, time out, let's pin those aside. Let's go back to the beginning. And so it was really cool. We got to do this journey together. And then what I was able to do is then distill back to that narration. I could go back and like narrate, oh, now here's 8 people their experiences, and they were everything from like screenwriters in Hollywood to multi-billion-dollar sales executives in terms of portfolios that they manage in tech, to a local executive coach, to it was real myriad, to a yoga teacher. So it was really cool, like holistic view of these different people's lives. And I curated that on purpose. And the biggest thing I was looking for was like, who are people who are going to be all in? Like they're going to be authentic, real, transparent, vulnerable. And then how can we then like journey together to like pick our way through this? So it became super fascinating. And for me, it deepened my conviction to see that here's a sample size of 8. And this is from exec to, a low-level engineer. Everybody wants to actually do better. They want to get out of bed. They want to feel like what they do matters. They want to feel like who they are, like with confidence, from an identity standpoint. And then all of them had some sort of like spiritual life too. They had something that connected them to a deeper purpose, a deeper, I just asked the question, like, where do you go when you need help? And I found that these people, they had an answer to that. Oftentimes people, when they don't have an answer to that, I find that it just adds to their struggle.
Well, even as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, we need to do a better job of trying to help our younger generation to accomplish what you were just talking about, and have that discovery and to, learn places to go, to be able to, understand that they need to find a purpose. Because if not, then it becomes the whole self-absorption, nose in a device thing. That's what they struggle with. But you talk about actually living by degrees and try. What does that mean?
Yeah, so Jim, I spend a lot of time in the wilderness, like I mentioned, and a compass to me is like a literal tool I use, and then it's an analogy-based tool. So what's cool about a compass is that when you adjust it by a degree, so it's 180 degrees would be in the opposite direction, 2 degrees. I went to this this week-long program in a place called On-Site Workshops in Nashville years ago, and one of the directors talked about, we're not attempting to make 90-degree turns, 180-degree turns. All we're trying to do is do 2-degree adjustments. And I remember thinking like, well, what good would that do? Like, that's so nonsensically small. But then I realized like, but in the wilderness, if I actually adjust 2 degrees, now if I walk half a mile, it's not a big deal. But you walk 50 miles and 2 degrees is a long way. So I have this friend who was a FedEx pilot during his life, career life, and he was telling me about, 2 degrees is a big deal as a pilot. You fly from LA to Hawaii, and 2 degrees, you will miss, if you're off by 2 degrees, you will miss the Hawaiian Islands by 80 miles. You will be lost at sea. So to me, it was like, okay, that really helps me shrink back to what can I do every day? What are the micro adjustments, the micro habits, the small tilts in the direction I want to head? And then that try is experimentation. It's just, you got to try something new. There's a great book out that I've been reading. It's called Designing Your Work Life. And it's a sequel to Designing Your Life. And these 2 Stanford professors, they talk a lot about design thinking. And one of the big things is you have to try new things. You have to experiment. You have to prototype. And so for me, like today, before I got on with you, one thing I started, I think it's 105 days ago, was running 1 mile every day. And it's just a miniature experiment. It's 1 mile. It's a super low bar, and it's something I can do every day. And it's not 10 miles. It's not 3 miles every other day. It's 1 mile every day. And my goal is to just sequence this. Like, let's see how far I can take this. And I don't have a destination in mind, but what I know is like, I want to be fit. And when I hit 50 years old, like a couple of years from now, like I want to feel like I'm 36. So like those are the small little incremental things I can do. So that's that degrees and try. Well,
and I think the 2-degree shift is a heck of a lot easier than, something that's more significant by far. Because I think also too, one of the issues associated, especially if you go into, backpacking and orienteering, is if you increase that, you end up going in circles, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's good. I'm glad that you even know those. Yeah, those are exactly. And the big thing is that what I want people to feel is I want people to feel empowered to start with the life that you have today, the career that you have today, the place that you stand today, which is why I say don't quit your job. Stay where you are and start the revolution with small increments of try and experimentation and 2 little degree adjustments. The same thing you always do, just try one thing this week that's different. And over time, I can attest, and many others can, how that builds over time.
Well, but then you also talk about giving your loyal soldier the boot. So how does that fit in?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, the loyal soldier was another Richard Rohr reference. He told a story about when Japanese soldiers came back from World War II. And one of the things that they did culturally was they actually had a ceremony. And they actually said, okay, welcome back. Thank you so much for what you've done in your service when you were away at war. And now we're asking you to retire your loyal soldier. Thank him, her, bless him, her, for all the great work they did. And now it's time for you to take your seat back in your life here with us in our community. So as a school teacher, as a surgeon, as a husband, as a son, as a daughter. And I found that fascinating of like, whoa. So what he talked about is the challenge is when we have, for each of us, there's stories that were installed in us along the way that are part of our operating system. So for me, an example is my parents split up when I was 12 years old. I'm the oldest of 3. And this really well-intended family friend was at our house, and he put his arm around me and said, "You're the man of the house now," when I was 12. And what I did with that over the course of my life was I owned that, and that became distorted. So that story became, no help is coming, you're on your own, and if it's to be, then it's up to you. So what I found was that loyal soldier part of me, who was really dutiful, worked really hard, got a lot of stuff done, made a big impact, and had gotten me this far, was also contributing to me being tired, exhausted, frustrated, alone. So what I realized was, so some people will use the framing of false self and true self. There's lots of frames that go with this, but the loyal soldier is, I actually sat down and wrote a letter to my loyal soldier and included it in the book. And again, very vulnerably of saying like, this is what my loyal soldier has told me in the past to be true. And what I loved was the pivot was, and now I'm going to be led by love. And that was a fundamental different, like versus scarcity. Scarcity was what led a lot of my story a lot of the way. And versus abundance, love, possibility, creativity. So that was where I really just kind of had like a ceremony of, thank you very much for your service. Thank you for getting me this far. And now I'm going to take it from here, and it's going to be great.
Well, without a doubt. I mean, you've poured a lot of inspiration, even into this episode, and it's all loaded in your book through all these stories. And, you've found more inspiration as you've gone on your journey. And one of the things that we look at on the show to help us hold on to and grab and garner some of that inspiration are quotes. Is there a quote or two that you like that you can share?
Oh, yeah, I would love that. Grab it. So one of my favorites is from author Anne Lamott. And she wrote a book, Chicken Noodle Soup for the Soul, I think is what her book is. So she wrote, almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you. So that's definitely one of my favorites. That's the one that's probably top of mind for me right now.
Well, thanks for sharing that. There's so many different facets to that. That's what I had to chuckle about. So you shared, even just here, a whole lot of stories, and we talk about getting over the hump on the show because people can learn from those. But if you can just give us some detail on one instance where you've gotten over the hump so that we can learn from it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the biggest pivots in the beginning a buddy of mine came over to my house. Things were difficult in my career. Things were difficult in our marriage. Things were difficult with our kids, our daughter's health at the time when she was still alive. And he said, you might not be able to change your circumstance, but you can own your atmosphere. And I was like, what? He goes, yeah, like the atmosphere of your home, like the atmosphere of you, like your emotional, physical, spiritual, mental health, wellness. And that really was perplexing to me because I had no idea what he was talking about at first. And he actually just dropped off some CDs it was a CD era. He had made me some music. He's like, I really encourage you to marinate, like put these on, listen to these, and wake up in the morning, put in the little earphones and start with this. And it really changed everything for me, of this idea of what if I own the atmosphere of my life, like my physical, emotional, spiritual well-being, my attitude, my outlooks, and then how do I expand that into my domain, my areas of influence? So I would say that for me, like, again, start small, 2-degree tries. Like I meditate most days. I use the Headspace app. It's 10 minutes. I start my day in quiet, prayer and meditation every day. I run, but these are small little things. Like these don't take a lot of time. So I just found that if I can start there, I think Tim Ferriss uses the phrase, if you can win the morning, you can win the day. So anything like that where you can take agency ownership over what's in front of you right now, then everything else from there becomes much easier.
And most definitely the Fast Leader Legion wishes you the very best. Now, before we move on, let's get a quick word from our sponsor. An Even Better Place to Work is an easy-to-use solution that gives you a continuous diagnostic on employee engagement along with integrated activities that will improve employee engagement and leadership skills in everyone. Using this award-winning solution is guaranteed to create motivated, productive, and loyal employees who have great work relationships with their colleagues and your customers. To learn more about An Even Better Place to Work, visit beyondmorale.com/better. All right, here we go, Fast Leader Legion. It's time for the Hump Day Hoedown. Okay, Aaron, the Hump Day Hoedown is the part of our show where you give us good insights fast. So I'm going to ask you several questions, and your job is to give us robust yet rapid responses that are going to help us move onward and upward faster. Aaron McHugh, are you ready to hoe down?
Let's do it.
All right. So what is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
I care too much about what other people think.
What is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
Say I'm sorry.
What is one of your secrets that you believe contributes to your success?
I believe in God.
And what do you believe is one of your best tools that helps you lead in business or life?
I'm eternally optimistic.
And what is one book that you'd recommend to our Legion? It could be from any genre. Of course, we're going to put a link to Fire Your Boss on your show notes page as well.
Essentialism, Greg McEwen's Disciplined Pursuit of Less.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion, you can find links to that and other bonus information from today's show by going to fastleader.net/Aaron, and that's AA, McHugh, and that's MCHUGH. Okay, Aaron, this is my last Hump Day Hoedown question. Imagine you were given the opportunity to go back to the age of 25, and you can take the knowledge and skills that you have now back with you, but you can't take it all. You can only take one. So what skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you, and why?
From today, I get to transport back to 25. And what's the wisdom I would take?
Yep.
Great question. I think something about that my wife is right more than she's wrong. I think I just believe that. Like that 25-year-old guy didn't believe it.
Aaron McHugh, thanks for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. How can the Fast Leader Legion get in touch with you?
Yeah, all things aaronmchugh.com. You can grab a free chapter of my book there. It's under Keep Going as a way to pace yourself. And yeah, there'll be podcasts there and guides, all that good stuff.
Aaron McHugh, thank you for sharing that knowledge and wisdom, and we'll continue to stay in contact with you. And thank you for helping us all get over the hump. Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.